The Vienna Confession. A Frank Murray Investigation. Season 3, Episode 9. Vienna understands winter the way cities do when they've been practicing for a very long time. Not the clean, Nordic practice of a Scandinavian capital, all white birch and gray water. Not London's perpetual gray drizzle. Vienna's winter is operatic, the kind of cold that arrives with architectural intention, that settles into the curves of the Ringstrasse like it belongs there, that makes the stone facades of the Hofburg and the State Opera look not merely old but composed, as if they were designed specifically to be beautiful in low December light with their breath hanging visible in the air above the Heldenplatz. We landed at Schwechat at noon on a Thursday. Sarah had slept on the connection from Heathrow. I had read Miles's full Vienna briefing again, all 19 additional pages, and arrived with a particular tight focus of someone who has absorbed too much information to feel anything except the shape of what comes next. Eleanor Voss, 61 years old, American-born, Baltimore, originally, a detail that felt almost impossible against the backdrop of her 11 years in Vienna. Cambridge-educated, Ph.D. in molecular biology, a postdoctoral fellowship at the Weizmann Institute in Israel before pivoting, in her late 30s, from bench science to the institutional world. She'd spent 10 years building consultancy that advised biotech firms on research strategy, regulatory navigation, and the long-term planning of programs that required decades rather than quarters to bear fruit. Pemberton had met her 14 years ago at a conference in Geneva. Miles had found the conference registration in the Recover Meridian Helvetica server data, a small detail, easy to miss, the kind of thing that only becomes significant when you've assembled enough of the surrounding picture to understand what it connects to. In the years after Geneva, Voss had moved progressively away from legitimate consultancy work and progressively toward the architecture of something else. She hadn't been recruited in the conventional sense. She hadn't been coerced. She had, by every account Miles had been able to reconstruct across 3 months of painstaking server forensics, contributed willingly and enthusiastically to the design of Project Chrysalis from the earliest planning stages, the distributed node structure, the consent exploitation framework, the carefully designed language of recruitment materials that made participation sound voluntary and beneficial and temporary when it was none of those things, the jurisdictional strategy, which exploited the gaps between national legal frameworks in Asia and Europe to create operational space that no single country's law enforcement could easily reach. The subject selection criteria that targeted people experiencing financial vulnerability because they were the easiest to recruit and the least likely to have legal resources when they eventually understood what had been done to them. All of that was Eleanor Voss, not the research itself. The architecture that made the research possible. I looked out the taxi window at the Ringstrasse as we came into the city, the broad circular boulevard of 19th century Imperial Vienna, its palaces and museums and opera house arranged with the deliberate grandeur of an empire that had decided magnificence was a form of governance, beautiful, committed to its own beauty in a way that said, "We built this to last, and everything inside it is worth protecting." I thought about what it took to build something for the purpose of using people without their knowledge or consent, and then to live in a city like this one, in its coffee houses and its concert halls, and the particular civilized contentment of a place that considered culture a public good. I thought about Ravi in New Delhi, whose mother needed surgery, about the 17 people in the Yokohama Medical Center, about the 23 in Los Angeles who were still living with what had been done to them. I thought about Eleanor Voss designing the architecture that put them there, and then moving to Vienna and spending 11 years in the most beautiful city in Central Europe, insulated from the human consequence of what she built the same way architects are insulated from the lives of the people who occupy their buildings. That was going to end today. Before I go any further, if you've been here for 9 episodes and you're still watching, that matters more than I can tell you. Hit that like button, subscribe, and ring the notification bell. It's the last city before home, and now Vienna. Inspektor Hanna Reiter of the Austrian Federal Bureau of Criminal Investigation met us at the Hotel de France on the Schottenring. Our hotel, her choice of meeting location, which was a kind of small professional signal that said, "I know where you are and I've been thinking about this meeting for longer than you have." She was 46, compact and precise in the way of someone who had spent a career in economic crime and learned that the details were everything and the drama was usually a distraction from them. Sandy hair cut practically short, a dark wool coat, and the expression of a person who had read 63 pages of documentation in the past 48 hours and had arrived with questions that the documentation didn't answer. "Murray," she said, and then to Sarah, "Murray, I've been expecting you since Torres's office called 2 days ago. I've been reading your case materials since shortly before that." "You got Miles's package," I said. "I got Miles's package," she said. "It is comprehensive. My team has been working through it in parallel with our own records on Voss." She sat down and folded her hands on the table with the efficiency of someone who didn't waste surface area on anything other than what mattered. "We have been aware of Eleanor Voss as a person of interest for approximately 14 months. We became aware of her through a routine financial surveillance review of transactions originating from Swiss accounts flagged by MROS. The amounts were not remarkable. The pattern was regular transfers," Sarah said. "Regular transfers from accounts we now understand were part of the Meridian Helvetica structure to an Austrian entity called Voss Research Advisory GmbH, always under reporting thresholds, always at intervals calculated to avoid triggering automated review." She paused. "We knew someone was being paid carefully. We did not know what for. Your documentation tells us what for. Where is she now?" I said. Reiter looked at the window. The Schottenring was visible, the broad boulevard, trams moving in both directions, Vienna doing its unhurried December thing. Her apartment is in the 1st District. Schottengasse, 3 minutes from this hotel, which is another reason I chose it. She has been in the apartment since yesterday afternoon. We have had a watching team in place for 36 hours. She paused. She has not attempted to leave. She has not, as far as we can determine, disposed of any materials. She received 2 visitors yesterday evening, both subsequently identified as academic colleagues from the Institute for Advanced Studies on Turkenstrasse. The meetings lasted approximately 90 minutes. Normal professional pattern. "She doesn't know we're here," Sarah said. "She knows the network has been dismantled," Reiter said carefully. "She has known since Zurich, since the Meridian Helvetica freeze. She received the communication from Ashworth 48 hours before Ashworth's arrest, which we intercepted and which read, in its entirety, London. Difficult. Vienna should be careful." That was the last communication she received from any Chrysalis network node. "She's been waiting," I said. "Since London," Reiter confirmed. 3 days of waiting. She has not run. She has not made contact with a lawyer. She has, as far as our watching team can determine, continued her normal pattern. Coffee at the Café Central in the morning, walk along the Donecanal, work at her apartment in the afternoon. "She's not running because she doesn't believe she's exposed," Sarah said. Ashworth's message warned her. It didn't tell her what we have. "Or," I said, "she's not running because she doesn't intend to." Reiter looked at me. "You think she's going to face it?" "I think she built something she believed in," I said, "and she's been watching it come apart for 8 months. And I think she's had 3 days to decide what the posture of a person who believed in it should be now, whether it's the posture of someone who runs or someone who stands by what they built." Reiter absorbed this with the careful consideration of an investigator who was not going to dismiss a psychological read, but was going to hold it lightly against the operational reality. "The arrest warrant is prepared," she said. "I can execute it this afternoon. And I want your assessment of this, Murray, because your documentation tells me you have spent more time understanding this network than anyone, if she is the kind of person you're describing. If she is going to stand by what she built, will she cooperate?" "She'll talk," I said. "The question is what she'll say." Reiter looked at me for a moment with the expression of someone arriving at the same place from a different direction. "I want you in the room," she said. "When we approach her, not for the arrest, that is my team's work. But before, you have context I don't have. She has context about you. She's been watching this case for 8 months. That context cuts in multiple directions. You want her to see us," Sarah said. "I want her to understand that the people who built the case are here," Reiter said. "That it's finished. Not a threat, a fact. People who intend to stand by what they built respond to facts differently than they respond to threats." She was right. "What's the plan?" I said. She takes her morning coffee at the Café Central, Reiter said. She has done so every day for 3 days. She'll be there at 9 a.m. tomorrow. My team will be in position. You will be at a table in the cafe when she arrives. She paused. She will see you. I believe she will not be surprised. Then my team approaches. And if she bolts, I said. The Café Central has 3 exits, Reiter said. All 3 will be covered. She picked up her coffee. She won't bolt. I agree with your read. Murray, she's not a person who runs. She's a person who argues. A pause, which, for the prosecution, is not the worst outcome. Miles called at 6 p.m. from Culver City. 9 a.m. his time, which meant he'd been at the monitor since before dawn, which was Miles's version of a normal Tuesday. Update on Voss's communication pattern, he said without preamble. In the past 72 hours, she's made 4 calls, all to academic contacts at the Institute for Advanced Studies and 1 to a professor at the University of Vienna's biology faculty. I've listened to 2 of them. A pause. Frank, she's not talking about running. She's talking about her research. The legitimate research. Her consultancy's published work on longitudinal genetic expression studies. She's talking about publication timelines and peer review, and whether her co-author should proceed with a specific paper without her. Without her, I said. She told the professor, I'm paraphrasing because it was in German and my German is adequate rather than fluent. She said something to the effect that she expected to be unavailable for professional matters in the near future, and that the work should continue regardless. Sarah was listening from across the room. Her expression registered the same thing mine did. She's organized her affairs, she said. She's been organizing them for 3 days. Miles said, the work continues. Her colleagues proceed. She's not erasing herself. She's preparing for an absence. Miles, I said, the security operative. Ashworth mentioned one in the Vienna communications. I've been working on that. Miles said, there's a man who appears on the peripheral surveillance footage from the last 36 hours. In the vicinity of Voss's apartment building on Schottengasse. Not someone I can identify from any database I have access to, but his positioning pattern is deliberate. He's rotating a watching brief, which is the same thing Reiter's team is doing from the other side. Voss has her own surveillance on herself. She knew someone would come, I said. She planned for someone to come. Miles said, whether for her protection or for something else. I can't tell you from the footage, but Frank, Reiter needs to know about this person before tomorrow morning. If he's still in position when they approach Voss in the cafe, the presence of an unidentified operative in the vicinity of a planned arrest is a complication that... I'll call Reiter, I said. Send me the footage. Already sent. Miles said, Frank, one more thing. Tell me... A pause. Not the processing pause or the triumphant pause. A pause with a different quality. I've been running the subject numbers. The total count, across all the facilities, including the people we disrupted before they were enrolled, including the people in Los Angeles who still have open medical cases. The scope of it. He stopped. She designed all of it. Eleanor Voss. The intake protocols, the consent language, the way subjects were selected. I've been sitting with that for 3 days, and I think you should know it before you walk into that cafe tomorrow. I know, Miles, I said. I know you know. He said, it seemed worth saying out loud, what she built. It was worth saying. I said, okay, he said, okay, be careful tomorrow, Frank, you and Sarah both. He hung up. I called Reiter. I sent her Miles's footage. She called back in 12 minutes to tell me that her team had already identified the individual, an Austrian national named Wernerstaub with a private security background and 1 previous conviction for aggravated assault that had been expunged, and that he would be detained before the cafe's central approach. Discreetly, she said, before 7 a.m. He won't know we've taken him until it's done. Good, I said. Get some sleep, Murray. Reiter said, 9 a.m. is 9 a.m. Vienna is punctual. She hung up. Sarah was reading by the window. The Schottenring outside was quiet. Late evening, trams running. The particular amber glow of Viennese streetlights on the pavement. Somewhere 3 minutes from where we were sitting, Eleanor Voss was at her apartment on Schottengasse, preparing for an absence she had decided was inevitable. "How do you feel about tomorrow?" Sarah said. "Ready," I said. She looked at me over her book with the expression of someone who was not going to press on ready because she knew what it contained. 16 years of working with someone gives you that. "I'll set the alarm for 7, she said. 7. I agreed. Vienna hummed outside the window. I slept the specific deep sleep of a person who's been moving for 8 months and is finally, genuinely close to the last thing. The Café Central is one of the great coffee houses of Vienna, which is a city that does not use the phrase great coffee house lightly. It occupies a vaulted former banking hall on the corner of Herrengasse and Strauchgasse in the 1st District, all high arched ceilings and marble columns, and particular quality of light that comes through tall windows into a space designed for transactions of significance and has been converted, over a century of dedicated use, into a space for the civil human transaction of coffee and pastry and newspapers and the unhurried exchange of ideas. Peter Altenburg had a table there in the early 20th century. Chess players still occupy certain corners. The waiters wear white jackets and move with the practiced calm of people in an institution that has survived 2 world wars and several empires and continues to operate on its own terms. Sarah and I arrived at 8:40. We chose a table with a clear sight line to the entrance and the secondary exit near the restrooms. I ordered melange. Sarah ordered an Einspanner and a piece of Apfelstrudel with the deliberate calmness of someone who was going to eat breakfast regardless of what was happening in the next 20 minutes. Outside, Reiter's team was in position. Werner Staub had been detained at 6:57 a.m. Quietly, 2 streets from Voss's apartment, before he'd reached the surveillance position. He had not, according to Reiter's text, said anything useful yet. At 9:03, Eleanor Voss walked through the door of the Café Central. She was exactly as her photographs, tall, gray-haired, the particular upright posture of scientists who had spent decades at a bench and had compensated for it with deliberate physical discipline. She wore a dark coat over a burgundy scarf, and she carried a leather briefcase of the serious, structured kind that academics carry when they mean to work. She moved toward her usual table. We'd been told she had one, that she'd been coming here for 11 years, and then she saw us. She stopped. Not dramatically. Not the stop of someone who had been caught off guard. The stop of someone whose confirmation of an expected thing requires a moment of acknowledgement before proceeding. She walked to our table. She sat down in the empty chair across from me, the one I had positioned deliberately, knowing she would come to us rather than requiring us to come to her, and she set her briefcase on the floor beside her with the careful precision of a person placing something valuable. She looked at me, then at Sarah. Then back at me. "Frank Murray," she said. Her American accent was still there, underneath 11 years of European cadence. Baltimore, faint but present, the specific vowels of the mid-Atlantic East. "I expected you sooner." "We were busy," I said. 8 cities, she said. "Yes, I've been following it. Seoul through London. Remarkable work, actually. I mean that without irony." She folded her hands on the table. "You closed the network faster than I thought possible. Not because I underestimated you, because I overestimated the structural resilience I built into it. The node independence didn't hold," Sarah said. Voss looked at her with what might have been genuine professional interest. "It held longer than I expected at the individual facility level. What I underestimated was the cooperative network you built on the other side. Nakamura and Lim, and Ahuja and Reiter and all of them. I designed Chrysalis to outrun a single jurisdiction. I didn't design it to outrun 7 working in concert." A pause. "That was the flaw. Not structural, strategic. I should have anticipated that the international law enforcement cooperation frameworks that existed on paper could be activated in practice under sufficient pressure." She was speaking about a network that had imprisoned and experimented on 135 human beings with the analytical distance of a scientist reviewing a failed experiment. I looked at her across the coffeehouse table and found something that was not quite anger, but adjacent to it. The particular cold feeling of being in the presence of intelligence deployed entirely in the wrong direction. "Dr. Voss," I said, "the Café Central was a good choice for this conversation. I want you to know something before my colleagues arrive." She waited. "Ravi," I said, 24 years old. Software engineer, New Delhi. His mother needed surgery. He enrolled in your program because the compensation covered the procedure. I watch your face. He's out. He's fine. The modification protocols in New Delhi were disrupted before they reached the stage the Manila and Seoul facilities reached. But he spent 6 weeks in a program you designed, believing he was participating in cognitive enhancement research, while people employed by a network you architected were doing things to his neurological function that he didn't agree to. Voss was still. The professional composure held. Sunita, I said, 43. Teacher. Enrolled because the consent document was written by people who understood consent law well enough to produce something technically compliant and practically fraudulent. She spent 10 weeks in Tokyo. She has been in and out of neurological assessment for 4 months. The doctors are cautiously optimistic about the long-term picture. I paused. Cautiously optimistic. You know what that phrase means. I've heard it from investigators and from doctors across 3 continents in the last 8 months. It means probably okay. Probably. With enough time. Voss set her hands flat on the table. You want to tell me their names, she said. It was not a question. Not hostile. Something else. I want you to understand what the architecture felt like from the inside. I said, not abstractly. Specifically, the woman in Seoul, mid-30s, who enrolled because a trusted contact referred her, and the referral came through a placement network you designed specifically to exploit trust structures. The man in Manila who was 28 and had a job, offer contingent on completing a wellness study. That was in fact Mr. Murray. She said it quietly, not in the way of someone who wanted me to stop, in the way of someone who needed me to. Her hands were still flat on the table. Her face had not changed, but something behind the composure was different, not broken, not collapsed, but moved. The specific quality of a wall does not yet come down, but is no longer entirely certain it should stay up. The research, she said, I want to be clear, the research itself, the genetic modification protocols, they worked. In the facility data that your team recovered, the actual scientific results of the programs, the modifications achieved what we designed them to achieve. The neurological optimization, the genetic expression changes, the longitudinal outcomes. In some of the subjects, Sarah said. Voss looked at her. In some of the subjects, Sarah said again, the ones whose outcomes were favorable. The Los Angeles facility documentation that was recovered also included the ones whose outcomes weren't. The adverse event records. The subjects who experienced permanent neurological changes that the protocols had intended. She held Voss's gaze. Dr. Foster's team have been working with the LA survivors for 8 months. They've shared their findings with the Korean and Japanese medical teams. The outcomes are not. The research did not work as designed, not uniformly, and the people it didn't work for as designed. I know, Voss said, quietly, not the I know of someone defending a position. The I know of someone who has known for longer than they've said it. Sarah, and I let that sit between us for a moment. The cafe central moved around us. Other tables, other conversations. The white-jacketed waiter moving across the marble floor with the unhurried pace of an institution that had been serving coffee for 140 years and intended to continue doing so regardless of what was being said at table 11. The adverse event data, Voss said. She was looking at her hands. It was reported. The facility scientists reported it through the operational channels, through the communication structure I designed. I received the reports. And I said, and the decision was taken to continue the protocols, she said. That decision was not mine alone, but I did not oppose it. She looked up. I told myself that adverse events were a necessary part of research at this stage, that the protocol improvements we made in the second and third generations of the program incorporated what we'd learned from the first generation. A pause. That is what I told myself. But, Sarah said, she was quiet for a moment, the longest pause of the conversation. Not theatrical, genuinely inhabited. But the first-generation subjects were not research volunteers who had accepted the risk of adverse outcomes as part of an informed consent process. They were people who had been told something false about what was happening to them. She folded her hands together. I understood that when I designed consent framework, I understood it when I designed it to be legally compliant in form and fraudulent in substance. I designed it that way on purpose, because I believed the research was important enough to justify the approach. She looked at the table. That is the part one cannot argue my way around. 2 beats of silence. Then Reiter's team came through the door. There were 3 of them, Reiter and 2 BK investigators. They moved with the efficiency of people who had done this and were very good at it, and had decided that efficiency was the appropriate register for this particular arrest. No drama. No announcement loud enough to disturb the surrounding tables. Voss watched them approach with the specific stillness of someone who'd been watching them come for 3 days. Reiter sat down in the chair beside her. The remaining chair, the one at the table's edge. She did not handcuff Voss immediately. She placed her credentials on the table and said, very quietly, what needed to be said under Austrian law in the commission of a formal arrest. Voss listened. She nodded once. Before we go, Voss said to Reiter, but also to me, to both of us to the table, I want to say one thing. Reiter looked at me. A brief, professional look. I nodded slightly. The research, Voss said, the underlying science, the possibility of genetic modification for neurological optimization. It is real. It is possible. The results from the compliant subjects, the ones in whom the protocols worked as designed, demonstrate outcomes that the legitimate scientific community will eventually validate through ethical means. She paused. What Richard and I built was the wrong way to prove it. I understood that it was the wrong way when we were building it. I chose to believe the importance of the work justified the method. She looked directly at me. I was wrong about that. I want that on record. Not for my legal situation. My legal situation is what it is. But for the record, what was done to those people was wrong, and I knew it was wrong, and I did it anyway. The cafe hummed around us. I thought about what to say, about whether there was anything to say that wasn't inadequate against the weight of what she'd just acknowledged. Thank you, I said, because it was what the moment required, not because it was enough. Reiter's team escorted Voss out of the Café Central and into a waiting vehicle on herring gas. She walked without resistance, briefcase left on the floor beside the table. The white-jacketed waiter watching with professional discretion of a man who had seen more in 40 years of working at this institution than he would ever discuss. Sarah and I sat at the table after she'd gone. I finished my melange. It was very good coffee. She knew, Sarah said. She always knew, I said. That was the point. She's not the kind of person who does things without understanding them. She understood everything she built. Then why? Sarah said, not philosophically, specifically, because she believed the destination justified the route. I said, and because the destination was real enough that she could use it to cover the route with enough intellectual scaffolding that it looked, from where she was standing, like something other than what it was. Sarah looked at the empty chair across the table. The research worked. She said it worked. Some of it, I said, in some subjects. You believe her? Sarah said, that the science is real? I said, yes, I believe her about that. The question of whether it's real doesn't change what was done to get there. Sarah picked up her Einspanner and held it for a moment. It's strange. When Hiroshi Tanaka cooperated in Fujisawa, I felt relief, mostly. When Meta in New Delhi decided not to execute the endgame directive, I felt relief. When Allenbach started talking in Zurich, I felt the shape of an ending. She paused. This feels different. Because she's different, I said. Tanaka was trapped. Meta was trapped. Allenbach was a true believer who did have the courage to be honest about what he believed in. Voss, I stopped. She was the truest believer and the most honest one, which makes what she built worse and what she just said more significant at the same time. Both things at once, Sarah said. Yes, I said, both things at once. We sat with that for a while in the Café Central, where Peter Altenburg had sat 100 years before, and chess players still occupied their corners, and the white-jacketed waiters moved with the serene continuity of an institution that had its own kind of permanence. Before I go any further, 9 episodes, 8 cities. If you're still here, you already know how this works. Hit that like button, subscribe, and ring the notification bell. You being here is what keeps Frank Murray walking into coffee houses he has no legal authority in. And now, back to Vienna, where a woman just confessed to building all of it, and we're not done yet. We met Reiter at the BK offices at noon. She's cooperating, Reiter said, before I could ask, fully and voluntarily. She waived the right to have her lawyer present for the initial conversation, which her lawyer, when he arrived 20 minutes ago, was not pleased about. A pause that contained something that was not quite satisfaction, but was adjacent to it. She has provided a complete account of her role in Project Chrysalis from the Geneva meeting with Pemberton 14 years ago to the London closure. She has provided documentation that she maintained in her apartment. Physical records, identical to Ashworth's methodology, because Voss designed the physical records protocol that Ashworth used. She built the entire operational security architecture. I said, including the records protocol. Reiter confirmed. And the records protocol, as implemented by Voss herself, is comprehensive. Her personal records include the original design documents for Project Chrysalis, the founding architecture, the theoretical framework, the research methodology rationale. She looked at me with the measured expression of someone delivering news that had multiple registers. It is the most significant single documentary evidence in the case. It places Voss at the origin. It also corroborates every subsequent facility operation, because the founding documents describe the operational model that was replicated across every node. And Pemberton, Sarah said, the founding documents. Name him by name in multiple places as the primary funder and strategic director of the program, Reiter said, with dates, with the financial commitments he made at the Geneva meeting, with subsequent communications across 14 years of development. I looked at Sarah. 14 years, she said. 14 years of records, Reiter confirmed. The U.S. Attorney's Office is being notified now. Torres's office is being notified now. This is, she stopped, the professional composure held, but only just. I have been in economic crime for 19 years. I have worked cases that involved months of documentation and multiple jurisdictions. This case is. She stopped again. The U.S. Attorney's Office is going to receive documentation that makes everything they already had substantially stronger. Is there anything we need to do? I asked. Give statements, Reiter said. Both of you. Everything that happened in the cafe this morning. Every word, every observation. My team needs it for the formal record. She paused. After that, I believe you are done in Vienna, Murray. What remains here is my team's work, and Torres's office, and several prosecutors across 7 jurisdictions. We're done, I said. Reiter looked at me with something that was not sentimental. She was not a sentimental person, but was genuine. Good work, she said. What you built across 8 countries. It worked. That matters. It mattered because the people in it made it work. I said, you, Nakamura, Okafor, Ahuja, Lim Reyes, Torres. And you, she said, without someone to start pulling threads, there are no threads to pull. That is also how it works. She shook our hands with the brisk precision of a person who had done what needed doing and was already thinking about the next thing. Then she went back to work. We were on our way back to the Hotel de France when Werner Staub's replacement tried to earn his fee. I hadn't known there was a replacement. Miles hadn't known there was a replacement. Reiter's surveillance team had watched Staub and missed a secondary operative, which is the kind of thing that happens when a network is being run by someone as careful as Eleanor Voss, who had apparently seen fit to maintain a 2-layer security arrangement even after Ashworth's warning told her the end was coming. The Herren gas was busy at noon. Winter tourists, office workers on lunch, a school group moving toward the Hofburg in a loose, supervised cluster. The man came from a doorway on the left side of the street, moving at the pace of purpose, not urgency, and I identified him as wrong 3 seconds before he reached us. 16 years, 14 times. You develop an instinct for particular quality of a person moving toward you with intent. I pulled Sarah left, and the shot went past us and hit the stone facade of the building we'd been walking beside, and the Herren gas went from lunchtime pedestrian to screaming movement in about 2 seconds. The man was already recalibrating for a second shot, And then Sarah was between us and him, and the second shot didn't happen because Sarah had changed that particular calculus in a way that I watched from 4 feet away with a specific combination of admiration and terror that characterized most of our confrontations. 40 seconds, beginning to end. Reiter's backup team, who had been on perimeter and came to the crowd at a run, had the man on the ground before the school group had fully processed what was happening. I stood on the heron gas with my ribs in the general vicinity of a lamppost I'd used when pulling Sarah left, and I looked at the stone facade where the shot had gone. 15, I thought. 15, Sarah said from 5 feet away, reading my face with 16 years of practice. She wasn't out of breath. She was assessing me. Are you hurt? Lamppost, I said. That counts as a save, she said. The shot missed, I said. That's the shooter's failure, not your save. I moved the target, she said. My save. She came over and looked at my ribs with the efficient assessment of a 20-year law enforcement professional who had seen worse. You'll be sore. Nothing broken. I know what broken feels like. I said, You do, she agreed. 15. She said it like a fact, because it was 1. Reiter arrived 40 seconds later. Took in the scene with the economy of observation of a person who assessed things quickly and accurately, and gave me a look that contained approximately 12 different things at once. Secondary operative. I said, We missed him. We missed him, she agreed. The we was deliberate, and I noted it. He will be very forthcoming. Men who fail at things like this are generally very forthcoming immediately afterward. We'll need to give more statements, I said. Yes, Reiter said. But first, are either of you injured? Lamppost, Sarah said, pointing at my ribs. Nothing structural. Reiter nodded. Come inside. Both of you. Vienna is buy you a coffee, and you're going to sit down before you fall down, Murray. I didn't fall down, but the coffee was very good. Torres called at 3 p.m. Vienna, he said. Vienna, I confirmed. Voss is in BK custody. She's cooperating. She has 14 years of founding records, including the original Chrysalis design documents with Pemberton named throughout. A pause that was different from every Torres pause I had heard in 8 months. The pause of someone receiving a final piece of something very large. The founding documents, he said. The full theoretical and operational framework. Origin to execution. Pemberton named from the Geneva meeting forward. Another pause. Shorter. Frank, I need you to hear something clearly. Tell me. The U.S. Attorney's Office called me 20 minutes ago, Torres said. They have been reviewing the case documentation with the founding records writers team transmitted. Their characterization. He stopped. Started again with the careful deliberateness of a man choosing each word. Their characterization is that this is the most comprehensively documented criminal conspiracy they have prosecuted at the federal level in 30 years. Their words, 30 years. A pause. With Voss's founding documents added to everything from Seoul through London, there is no avenue of defense that does not require Pemberton's legal team to argue against their own client's documented signature, voice, and recorded direction across 14 years of operational correspondence. His lawyers are going to challenge everything. I said, his lawyers are going to challenge everything. Torres confirmed. And they are going to do it with frozen accounts, and without Allenbach, and without Ashworth, and without Voss, and without Rice, and without Tanaka, and without Mehta, and without every other cooperating witness we have across 8 jurisdictions. They are going to challenge the most documented international criminal conspiracy that the federal system has seen in 3 decades. He paused. I want to choose my words carefully here. I won't be precise. Torres, I said, just say it. A pause. The last Torres pause. The one I've been waiting for since Seoul. He's finished, Torres said. Richard Pemberton is finished. I sat with that. The Hotel de France room was quiet. Outside, Vienna moved with its composed winter pace, indifferent to what was being said inside this particular room, indifferent to 8 months in 7 cities, and 135 people, and one long, distributed criminal enterprise that had been dismantled one city at a time by people who refused to stop pulling threads. Frank, Torres said, you and Sarah come home. Los Angeles needs you. The trial needs you. Mrs. Chun is apparently keeping a specific pot of soup warm against your return, and Miles Danforth is, I'm told, has cleaned his office, which I understand is a significant event. I laughed. For the first time in a long time, I just laughed. Miles cleaned his office? I said, a partial clean, Torres said. The monitors are still there, but the energy drink collection has been consolidated. We'll be there, I said. Good, Torres said. Thank you, Frank, both of you, for everything. He hung up. Sarah was in the doorway of the bathroom, watching me with the expression she used when she already knew the content of the call from my face and was waiting for confirmation. Torres said he's finished, I said. She was quiet for a moment. Then, no, cautiously, I confirmed. She crossed the room and sat on the edge of the bed and looked at the window, outside the Schottenring. Beyond it, the city, somewhere 3 minutes away on Schottengasse, Eleanor Voss's apartment sat empty, with 11 years of life in it that was about to be examined by people with warrants and evidence gloves. Somewhere across the Pacific in the Eurasian landmass, Richard Pemberton sat in Korean custody, and his lawyers were about to read a file that had just gotten substantially worse. Portugal, Sarah said. It was the first time she'd said it first. I sat down beside her. The city moved beyond the window with its trams and its ringstrasse and its beautiful, composed, winter-lit indifference to what had just happened inside it. After L.A., I said. After the trial. After L.A., she said. I know, but after that. She looked at me. I mean it this time. I know, I said. So do I? She took my hand. We sat there for a while in Vienna, in December, in the particular stillness of people who have been running for a long time and have arrived at the place where they can finally stop. Not forever. Not without a trial still to come and a verdict still to wait for and the slow, difficult work of accountability still ahead of us. But for now we sat. Miles called at 5 p.m. I put him on speaker. Okay, so, he said, Vienna, which, all right. First, I saw the report about the Herring gas incident. Are you both okay? Fine, I said. 15 now. 15, Miles said. There was a pause. Sarah saved count? 15, Sarah said. Okay, Miles said. Good. I'm adding it to file. So, Voss, I've been going to the founding documents that Reiter's team transmitted in the last hour. Frank, the original Chrysalis design documents. They are, he stopped. She's brilliant. I mean, I know that's a strange thing to say about someone who built what she built, but the structural design, the node independence architecture, the jurisdictional strategy, the consent framework, I've been reconstructing this from fragments for 3 months, and seeing the original is like seeing the answer key. Every choice I wondered about is explained. Every decision that seemed arbitrary has a specific, documented rationale. Another pause. It's extraordinary work in service of a monstrous purpose, and I've been sitting here for an hour trying to figure out how to feel about that. Both things at once. I said, both things at once. Miles said, yes. Okay. Frank, I'm looking at the flight option for you and Sarah from Vienna. There's a connection through Frankfurt that gets you into LAX at 6:15 p.m. tomorrow. Traffic from the airport is going to be... Miles, I said, yeah. Book it. A pause that had in it every energy drink and every late night and every impossible deadline and 3 months of building a picture that was now complete, already booked. Miles said, I did it 20 minutes ago. Just needed you to confirm. Another pause. Detective is on your desk chair. I tried to move him, but you know how he gets. He's been there since Monday. Tell him I'm coming home. I said, he doesn't care. Miles said, he's a cat. Tell him anyway. I said, yeah. Miles said, yeah, okay. See you tomorrow, Frank. Both of you. He hung up. Sarah was already looking at me with the expression that had, over 16 years, come to mean, I've been thinking the same thing, and yes, let's go home. We went to dinner. Not a working dinner. Just dinner. A Heuriger on the edge of the first district that had wood panel walls and a menu of exactly 3 things and wine from the Vienna hills and the particular quality of a place that had no interest in any world outside its own 4 walls. We ate. We talked about things that had nothing to do with Chrysalis or Pemberton or the trial or the verdict. For 3 hours in Vienna in December, we were just two people having dinner. It was very good. I walked to the Donaukanal before the morning flight. The canal runs along the eastern edge of the First District, the old city, the city inside the ring. And at 6 a.m. in December, it is flat and dark and very quiet. The lights of the bridges reflected in the still water. The city not yet fully awake on either bank. Eleanor Voss had walked here, Miles had told me, part of her daily pattern. Coffee at the Central, and then a walk along the canal before returning to work. I stood at the Schwedenbruck and looked at the water and thought about what she'd said in the cafe. The things she'd said that I hadn't expected. I was wrong about that. Not as a legal strategy. Not as a positioning maneuver for the cooperation process. As a statement of the things she actually believed, at the end, when the architecture was gone and all that was left was what she'd built it for. She'd been wrong. She'd known she was wrong. She'd done it anyway. And then she'd spent 3 days in her apartment, organized her affairs, and walked into the Café Central, and sat down across from me at a table she knew I'd be at. I didn't understand her, not fully. I understood the believing in the work part. I had spent 16 years doing this job for reasons that weren't always entirely rational, and that I couldn't always fully explain to people who hadn't done it. The pull of something you believed mattered enough to justify the cost. What I didn't understand was a specific moral architecture that let you believe the cost was other people. But I had been trying to understand that for 8 months, across 7 cities, in every facility and every sublevel, and every conversation with a researcher who had done something they'd known was wrong because they believed in the work. And what I'd learned was that understanding it wasn't the point. The point was stopping it. The point was being stubborn enough and thorough enough and willing enough to keep pulling threads until the whole structure came apart. We'd done that. 16 years in this business. 135 people. 8 cities. 1 man in a Korean holding cell whose lawyers were reading a file this morning that made every previous file look thin. The Donaukanal moved quietly below the Schwedenbruck. Vienna was beginning to wake. A tram crossing the far bridge, a jog on the canal path, the smell of a bakery somewhere upstream. I took out my phone and called the office. For AM Los Angeles time. The call rang twice and went to voicemail, my voicemail. The message I'd recorded when I first opened the office above Golden Dragon. The one I'd never updated because I kept meaning to and never got around to it. "You've reached Frank Murray Investigations," the old recording said. "Leave a message." I listened to it. 16 years of an office above a Chinese restaurant on 4th Street in Los Angeles. The smell of 5-spice and sesame oil. Detectives sleeping on the desk chair. Mrs. Chen's egg rolls arriving at a time that had no apparent logic to it, except that they were always exactly when you needed them. "I'm coming home," I said, to my own voicemail, which was a strange thing to do, and which I did anyway. Give detective my best. I hung up. I walked back to the hotel. Sarah was packed. The flight left at 8. Los Angeles was waiting. 16 years in this business. And the one thing I've learned is that the truth doesn't find people. People find the truth, but only if someone keeps looking. If these cases matter to you the way they matter to me, hit that like button, subscribe, ring the bell, because the last case is already waiting. Los Angeles is the end. The trial is the end. The verdict is the end. And I've been waiting for this one since the beginning. I'm Frank Murray. I don't quit. Neither should you.